I like Yuri manga. There's still a stigma in Japan about homosexual relationships, and while it's not necessarily a good thing, it does make the prospect of a homosexual romance story taking place in the country more interesting. Because at its core, a romance story is interesting because you get to see these couples overcome obstacles together and grow closer for it. A Yuri manga, and presumably yaoi manga, is capable of placing more obstacles in the couple's path, and therefore, it has more potential as a romance story. But unfortunately, just because it can, doesn't mean that it always will. Mari Kamakura is a bookish high school girl who spends her days at school alone. That is until one day when she is approached by the charismatic Eiko Ohashi, who makes it her mission to transform Mari into a popular high school girl. In the process, the two become the best of friends. However, Mari begins to develop new feelings for her best friend Eiko that push on the borders of friendship and threaten to either bring their close relationship to wonderful new heights or destroy it forever. The story, obviously, revolves around Mari and Eiko's budding relationship, although it has a tendency to get distracted by bantering. A lot of bantering. In fact, the first volume and a bit has nothing going on apart from dull conversations about fashion and makeup and boys. Riveting. And it's not as if any of that stops for much longer than a few pages. It's all instantly forgettable fluff that does not need to be there. You end up greeting most pages with an ugh when you turn over to find yet another wall of boring dialogue that doesn't add to any characterization, plot, atmosphere, or any element of the series. It forces the real plot of the manga down to a snail's pace. Unless you want to read about beauty cream and mascara, in which case you'll have a whale of a time with this one. It does make the ears perk up when the story gets around to Mari and Eiko's relationship, but I wouldn't say that it makes up for the slog you have to endure to get there. The interesting thing about a Yuri manga is watching these girls get to grips with their sexuality, because you don't see much opportunity for those kinds of themes anywhere else. And those themes are certainly present in this manga, which I suppose I can at least give it credit for. While it wasn't a groundbreaking portrayal, it still managed to put together a competent story thread where Mari and Eiko come to terms with their desires for members of the same sex. The problem is in how the manga portrays the other interesting conflicts that Yuri manga imply, because it doesn't portray them at all. The manga seriously ends before Mari and Eiko announce the nature of the relationship to their family or friends, and therefore it doesn't become an issue. There is one person who figures it out, but nothing becomes of that. There is a cliffhanger strategically placed at the end of the first omnibus designed to make you think that the plot is actually thickened, but it all turns out to be lies. Shameful lies with no reason other than to get you to pick up the next omnibus, which I ended up falling for. The characters are probably the worst thing about this series. I'll start with Eiko because she's a good jumping off point. Conjure in your mind the most standard, stereotypical image of a teenage girl. That's Eiko. And I'm not about to tell you that that is really a good thing, because it isn't. She gets a few scenes that firmly establish her sexuality and humanise her a bit more in the process, but this doesn't change the fact that she's a bland person. She obsesses over fashion and makeup and her friends, and that's her entire personality. There isn't even anything else that makes her an interesting person, so you end up not caring about her at all, because when the role of protagonist switches from Mari to her, you already know that they're both in love with each other, so it's only a matter of time before they get together. Now I'll talk about Mari. She starts out as her own character, shy and reserved, but willing to change herself to find happiness. It's too bad this total transformation is complete in a matter of several chapters, and the result is that she's become just as bland and uninteresting as Eiko. She is now concerned with fashion and makeup, just a carbon copy of Eiko at this point, the only difference being that her original character makes her still come across as hesitant. That is until we switch to Eiko and find out that she is also a hesitant person, which makes us assume that everyone in the context of the story is that way. People in real life are like that too, and we end up associating this trait with every single character. And while you can say that that sentence alone means that they are more relatable to the audience, and I can't necessarily disagree with that, it still distracts you to know that this is how Morinaga is trying to justify padding out Mari and Eiko's relationship. The supporting cast aren't much better either. There's Tamamin, who loves fashion, makeup and cosplay. Sugi-san likes makeup, fashion and juggling boyfriends. Kuno-chin is obsessed with makeup, fashion and above all her beloved boyfriend. Have you noticed a trend yet? Yes, everyone is the same, save for one trait each. Unfortunately, this is not enough to make them all characters in their own right. Besides Sugi-san, each of the supporting characters are completely interchangeable, because their quirks are exclusively used for forgettable jokes and fail to define them. The problem with Sugi-san though is that we remember her for being the one with 5 boyfriends at once. This is supposed to come off as charming or something, but cheating isn't charming, especially since she never gets her comeuppance either. The artwork is definitely a stronger element of the series. It manages to tell you, amongst a torrent of meaningless dialogue, which lines actually mean something. It's the subtleties of character reactions, framing and dramatic angles that tell you when to pay attention and when to zone out. The soft style itself also makes everyone and everything look adorable, which works for a manga as devoid of tension as this one. It also manages to change fluidly between a comedic tone and a dramatic one, though it's never anywhere near over the top in either direction. It is undeniably good artwork, perfectly suited to a series as optimistic and inoffensive as this one. However, I do have a couple of issues with the art. Firstly, there's a problem with the shading on the character's hair. I know this is extremely small, and it doesn't impact whether we can tell characters apart or not, but Eiko's hair is incorrectly shaded throughout the entire series. She's supposed to be a brunette, but her hair is never given any shading, which makes you think that she's a blonde. But characters like Sugi-san and Tamamine have shaded hair, giving the implication that Eiko's hair colour is lighter than it actually is. Details like that make the artwork feel lazy at times, and I'm sure if I spent a little more time looking for them, I'd find even more shortcuts like it. My other issue is with one chapter in particular, in which Mari and Eiko are depicted having sex. Although it isn't explicitly shown, the chapter is much more sexual than the rest of the series, more so than it needed to be. I appreciate the inclusion of mature themes, and the scene didn't exactly come out of nowhere, but the way in which it was drawn makes it more intense than necessary. There are drawn nipples for the first time in the series, and they're everywhere to boot. Vaginal secretions are also shown. It's the amount of sexual content condensed into one chapter that came out of the blue. I suppose you could call it solid catharsis after an entire series worth of built up sexual tension between Mari and Eiko, and I couldn't deny that. It always is cathartic to see a romantic couple embrace each other after trying times, but I just feel that it didn't need to be as overtly sexual as it was. Honestly, this manga is a mess. The amount of actual Yuri content is only enough to cover maybe 7 or 8 chapters. Every character is a slight deviation of the same boring stereotype, including the two protagonists, and actively avoids narrative conflict, completely ignoring the interesting implications of its own genre, and telling an incredibly bland, inoffensive story with barely any concrete resolution. Sure, the artwork isn't bad, but it isn't exactly exhibition worthy either. I suppose you can't always expect creative genius though, and if I had to recommend it, I'd say to go in with an open mind, a ton of patience, and zero expectations. There is a half decent romance story at work here if you're patient enough for it. If you have above average standards however, then I tell you to give it a skip. If for some reason you still want to read Girlfriends, then all 5 volumes are available in English, compiled into 2 omnibus volumes from 7 Seasons Entertainment. If you're looking for a Yuri manga that fits a broader audience, I'd recommend Citrus. It cuts out all the needless fluff and gets right into the nitty gritty, favouring character development over girlish bantering. Or if you just want a better romance, I'd recommend Orange. It has a hell of a lot more conflict than Girlfriends, and tackles the mature themes it has the chance to head on. Hopefully one of these fruity flavours will be to your liking. Remember to leave your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, cheerio.